Hello, my name is David Brett. I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times, and joining me today is Kerry-Lynne Findlay, a, a candidate for the Conservative Party of BC leadership race that's running right now. Thanks for joining us today, Kerry-Lynne.
Hi, David. Thank you very much.
Oh, no problem. So let's just jump right into it. Can you give our viewers kind of a Kerry-Lynne Findlay 101? You have quite a major background in politics. Seems like a lot of the things that you've been involved in federally are right in the wheelhouse of all the problems we're facing in BC right now. So for folks who don't know, uh, how did you get here where you're jumped into the leadership race?
Well, thanks, David. I'll make it short as I can. I'm lifelong British Columbian, born and raised here, born in the big town of Ladysmith. I grew up in Nanaimo, came over to Vancouver to go to UBC, where I took my undergrad in, believe it or not, Soviet studies mostly in those days, which prepared me well for the geopolitical scene, it seems, continuing throughout my lifetime. And then I took my law school at UBC Law, became a lawyer at 23, went through school a couple of years ahead, and then had a long career in law, civil litigation in downtown Vancouver mostly, but I also had a sole practice in Vancouver for a bit and a sole practice when I was out of politics, and then went back in out of South Surrey, where I live today. And along the way, I had 4 children. My husband, Brent, was an actor and producer, but now he's an MLA in Surrey South for the Conservative Party of BC from the last election. So that's a year and a half. But actually, I was the one in politics long before that. After having a successful career, being president of the bar, also I was a judge on the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal for 5 years. I went into Harper's majority government in 2011, representing Delta Richmond East. That's a riding that doesn't exist anymore, but I served in that capacity for 5 years, and I was made the Parliamentary Secretary to Justice by the Prime Minister, shepherded through, and you say the relevance to today, this is one of the most relevant, actually, is I shepherded through an act we called the Safe Streets and Communities Act. It was a large justice reform omnibus bill meant to target repeat and violent offenders. If we had some of those rules and laws in place today, we wouldn't keep hearing on the news that someone who's just killed a police officer or killed anyone is out on release having done another violent crime a few months previous. These are very serious issues throughout Canada, but certainly here in BC. And then I was appointed by the Prime Minister to be the Associate Minister, went into Cabinet, the Associate Minister of National Defence, which gave me a really good understanding of Canada and the geopolitical scene globally, although that is always evolving and changing as we speak, literally. But it's a good sense of understanding about security issues in our province and in our nation. I also had an oversight with procurement at a time when we had troops in Afghanistan. So getting kit and equipment to our men and women overseas was very important. I streamlined the procurement process during that time. Unfortunately, once we withdrew from Afghanistan, the bureaucrats kind of socked back in to the procurement process, which is why pieces of even major equipment like jets, we still don't seem to have managed to get. Then I was promoted to the senior ministry of Minister of National Revenue, and I did that for 2.5 years, which gave me a very good grounding in the economics of government. Revenue in, costs out, what it all means, how I was on Treasury Board as well in that role. So I understand how one can turn an economy around, which is what we desperately need here in BC right now. Then I was back to the practice of law for a bit and then went back in 2019 in a new riding. My old riding was gone. And that's the new to me, I mean, the South Surrey White Rock, which is actually where my parents retired to after they left the island and had been my home base for many years. And I represented the good people there. 2019, I was elected in 2021. We had various leaders federally during that time. I had shadow ministers' roles of environment and climate change, as well as, again, national defense. And then when Pierre Poilievre took the leadership, he put me on his leadership team of 9 as the BC rep, and I became the chief opposition whip. Again, very relevant to this race because for 2.5 years, I had to manage a caucus 3 times the size of the Conservative Party of BC's caucus, with, of course, a divergent group of Conservatives running under the Conservative banner, but you have Libertarians, you have pro-choice, pro-life, social Conservatives, you have people who say, well, I'm socially liberal, but fiscally conservative. And, there's a variety of approaches that one takes in a big conservative tent. But the management of caucus, the bringing them together as a team, worrying about the morale of that team, presenting a united front, making sure that there is robust conversation in the caucus room before heading out to announce things to the public or taking a position on a vote. I was overseeing all of that, as well as the work of committees. And I think both provincially and federally, people don't necessarily understand in the public what an important role committee work is, because that's where you have testimony from people throughout the province, where you address topics of debate much more specifically. And it's very important how a party proceeds together toward a goal of either holding the government to account, or if you are in government, to explain what you're doing and why. In this race, provincially, I've always fought and advocated for my province and my community. In this race, I think experience really, really matters. And my background matters because we're in a crisis in our province, in my view. The NDP put forward a crushing budget, which showed no hope, no vision other than we've overspent, we've spent recklessly, so now you pay us more taxes. They upped the rate on the lowest income tax bracket. They've gone after things like a new PST 7% on bookkeeping. Every small business pretty much has a bookkeeper because you're trying to be compliant with the government regulations that you're already being forced to deal with. And these are regressive taxes. It doesn't show any awareness or understanding of the need to rein in the spending, profligate spending under this NDP government. Eby, and it's really down to David Eby and his administration and his ministerial executive, because John Horgan, albeit an NDP premier, left a surplus. This $183 billion in growing debt, us going down in our credit rating for the 5th time, this is all under his watch, and only over the last 4 years. Very, very concerning lack of competence, lack of fiscal sanity, really. And I believe the NDP must be defeated. I think I'm uniquely qualified for the role, and that's why my name is put forward, and we're running a strong, good race, a principled race, and here we are together.
Right. Well, you raise a good point about the federal government. Many of the issues you said crisis, the sort of crisis issues we're facing in BC right now are not solely provincial policies. For example, indigenous Aboriginal rights and title. We have the federal government and their role, and then you have, for example, the recent Musqueam decision. It's a deal with the federal government, but it affects British Columbia. And then And then you mentioned, the uh, criminal code and all of the rev revolving door issues and the overdose crisis, drug laws. These kind of overlap with the federal government. So your ability to kind of understand Ottawa, do you think that's missing in the EB government, that they don't really have any people anymore in Ottawa with the NDP?
It is very necessary in a confederation like ours and such a big country that we have, that different levels of government can work together. Now, that doesn't mean you will agree. It means that you either you understand other levels of government, you're willing to work with them, but it also means you're willing to stand up to them when their policies do not work for your province. This BC has been my home all my life. I love my province, and I'm really concerned about where we're at right now. You've mentioned the property rights issue, so if I can chat with you about that just for a minute. I've just been in on a northern tour. I've been up as far as Fort St. John, Chetwynd, Mackenzie, Dawson Creek, Williams Lake, a number of places. I've been up in the Okanagan a couple of times, and it is now becoming the overarching issue right now in British Columbia because of the uncertainty it creates, because of the inequity it appears to create. And one of the things that anyone lucky enough to have worked hard enough and managed their life enough to own a home, which we know is not possible for many, many who would like to own a home. But for those who own a home, or farmers who own acreage, we've been told all along that our land title system is the best in the world. It's called a Torrens system, and it's literally based on when you pay your money and when that deed is date stamped. From that moment on, you have a piece of paper that says this property belongs to you. That's something that people use to refinance, they mortgage, they buy and sell. It's also one of the last assets that anyone in Canada can sell without attracting punishing capital gains tax. So for the average British Columbian, if they're lucky enough to own a home, it is their major asset. And maybe they own a car and a truck, or one car, or maybe they don't even have a car. They don't really have a lot of savings, don't have pensions. Only people who've been in government service or through a union have pensions. And many, many people are self-employed. And we know that 40% of British Columbians say they're $200 away from insolvency at the end of each month. So basically, people spend what they earn. They're just trying to hold on, and now they're taxing us even more. The way I got into politics was through really a very analogous issue. I was widowed when I was 34. I had two young kids, 6 and 7.5. My parents said they'd come and help me for a couple of years. That's what families do. I'm one of 6 kids. I'm near the end of the line. So my parents were already older when they said they'd help me out. And I had to get my career back under my feet. I was working, I was a lawyer, but my husband took with him 3/4 of our family income. So I really did have to start again. We bought a home, a leasehold home on Musqueam First Nation in South Vancouver. And that's where we moved to, me, the kids, and my parents, to try and get my life back in a steady trajectory. It was very sudden, so no preparation. When we moved there, I could buy that home for a little less than freehold off reserve, and it meant it was viable for us in terms of the mortgage. And my parents were long retired, so I was the one working, making the payments. And it had been a peaceful community for 24 years. Plus, when I bought, and assured by the realtor, I paid my property taxes to the city of Vancouver based on the fair market value of my property. That was something I was used to and I could understand. 1 year into it, the federal government changed the taxing authority from the city of Vancouver and gave it to the Musqueam First Nation. So now you're paying your property tax to the First Nation, only you have no representation before the First Nation because only band members can address chief and council. We tried to put an advisory group together. It never worked. The meetings were canceled. It just never really got off the ground. Then the BC government stepped in and they said, first of all, Musqueam, you don't have to share any of that tax revenue with the way the city does, 50% for schools, 8% for regional tax. You can keep it all. Secondly, we are going to change the BC Assessment Act. It's still this way today. Leasehold on Aboriginal land is now valued as though it were fee simple or freehold off reserve. So although the tax rate didn't change, the amount you were paying doubled and tripled. You're being taxed triple by a regime you cannot speak to. And then we got into a dispute with First Nations. We're talking about 150 families, as I recall, around that. Because there was a yearly payment that was part of the lease arrangement. It was one of the first leases of its time in Canada, and it was non-prepaid. It was 99 years. The subdivision right beside it, also in Musqueam, was prepaid because the market had already said we won't buy, with staged payments. But the one we were dealing with had that. Musqueam wanted $36,000 on average a year. No one could pay that. After tax, an extra $3,000 a month was impossible. This is in the late 90s, and we offered $8,800 a year. When we resisted, the First Nation sued us. So now you've got 150 families, neighbors, disparate neighbors, neighborhoods are neighborhoods. Sometimes you know people, sometimes you don't, sometimes you're great friends, and all of a sudden we're thrown together. We are all defendants in a major lawsuit with a First Nation backed up by two governments. And so we had to fight. And as the lawyer involved, living there and understanding it, they turned to me. So I was part of the litigation team. We went to the BC Supreme Court, BC Court of Appeal, all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, fighting that fight. We won. The leaseholders won that case. But the toll was immeasurable. Emotional toll, physical toll, financial toll. It cost the leaseholders $1.5 million in legal fees, which we had to cobble together sort of monthly from contributions. And at the end of the day, when we won the case and the court said the payment should be $9,600, I believe. This is an average payment. So that's quite close to what we'd offered in the first place. The Musqueam First Nation was ordered to pay costs, which happens with the losing party in a litigation. The costs were around $350,000, but they never paid it. The federal government cut the check for them. So they took no risk, dragged 150 families through 3 levels of court. We won. But in the meantime, with the uncertainty around Aboriginal governance, with the dispute, with everything going on, appraisers would no longer appraise those properties. They wouldn't give a fair market value anymore. So if you had a mortgage, you couldn't renew your mortgage. If you wanted to refinance, you couldn't, because the banks wouldn't lend when you had no surety on what the fair market value was. So for at least a decade, you were living in your home. You still had your deed, but it became a piece of paper that represented no equity and no value. You were living in your home, but you were still paying your mortgage. You're paying the yearly amount. You're paying more taxes to the First Nation without any representation, and your home is worthless. Eventually, people started to go bankrupt. People moved away who were elderly and just lost everything. It was a very, very trying time. And my conservatism is by conviction, not convenience. And my fight for what is reasonable and fair and common sense for British Columbians is not just based in a hope and a prayer. It is based in tried and tested approaches to governance which work, tried and tested approaches to legal, complex, multi-layered legal issues like that one was, that work. I am a fighter. I have fought these fights, and I intend to fight again for British Columbians against an EB government that really doesn't seem to care about working men and women in this province. They refer to some of our historic, vibrant industries like forestry, mining as sunset industries. Well, who decided that? David Eby's government decided these were sunset industries. That's how they're referring to them now, because they have sunsetted them. They have not put the time and energy into talking to people in those industries who know how to fix things, who know how to improve it. Our forestry industry, I'm being told basically we've turned into raw log exporters to Asia, and then they process them because we have no processing plants anymore and sell them back to us. It's the same with our oil and gas. They leave our LNG in the ground.
Right.
The oil comes through. We sell it to the Americans at discount prices. They refine it over the border at Cherry Point and other refineries and sell it back to us at world prices. This is not acceptable.
So just a quick question.
That prosperity, right?
Yeah, just a comment about your story about the Musqueam. I actually grew up in the Dunbar neighborhood, down on the flats, not far from the Musqueam Reserve. And I remember vividly when that development started, it seemed like such a win-win. It's like, okay, yeah, all this land is going to be used for housing. Isn't that great? And people built some amazing houses in that area near Musqueam Extension Park, where I grew up playing. And then, but I would encourage people to, if they ever get a chance to drive through that neighborhood now, because your heart just sinks. Because a lot of the houses are just a kind of, I guess they call it demolition by neglect. Some of the houses are just falling apart. And it's like, wow. So, so I can relate to what you're saying, and I think it's a very good example, your lived experience of how things can go sideways that seem at the beginning to be such a great idea. Like, oh, it's a mutually beneficial agreement, turns out to be rather one-sided. So if we look at what's happening with Musqueam now, with this agreement, this sort of uh, very kind of vague agreement uh, that kind of was announced recently. What are your thoughts on that specific agreement regarding the entirety of the city of Vancouver? What's your take on that?
We've got two serious issues unfolding in parallel at the moment. The impact of that Cowichan judicial decision, BC Supreme Court, which some people seem to think really only applies to Richmond just because that's where the court is. No, it's a BC Supreme Court decision that has said that Aboriginal title is superior to our land titles system. That's very serious. But coming out of that case is this very important issue, which relates to the Musqueam and the federal. The judge said very clearly in her decision that neither the federal government nor the provincial government made any argument whatsoever or presented any evidence whatsoever as to the primacy of our land title system. Both the federal and provincial government have abandoned the field. And I explained to people that the Crown in these cases is represented by the government of the day. The government of the day, which right now is the NDP government under David Eby, is the entity that hires the lawyers to represent the Crown in these cases and instructs the lawyers. So if you go back to something like the Delgamuukw decision, one of the seminal early cases on Aboriginal title, that case was originally for supremacy of the land title system at the BC Supreme Court. But then there was another NDP government run by Mike Harcourt, and he fired those winning lawyers and changed their instructions. So upon doing so, that case was lost at the Court of Appeal, and it was lost at the Supreme Court of Canada. This is a danger today because they are not making the arguments for the Crown or for our current system because they're so ideologically driven to only support the Indigenous point of view. And with all due respect, the Indigenous population of British Columbia is less than 5%. They're saying to the other 95% that this small group now has that kind of power over your assets. And it quickly can become an asset confiscation, just like it happened in Musqueam 25 years ago to those leaseholders. Even when they got some market value back, there were, I don't know what the homes sell for today, but back at that time, a house that might have sold for $535,000 then sold once they got some equity back for about $170,000. So you have a loss usually below the mortgage of everything you have, all your equity. So right now with the federal government coming in and at the worst possible time, in my view, after that Cowichan decision, which is causing division, not just between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but between First Nations. Because now they're jumping in saying, well, we're making a claim, we're doing this, because they're afraid that the neighboring First Nation is going to do it first. Kamloops has just laid a claim to the whole city of Kamloops. So the federal government comes in and says, first of all, YVR just signed a week ago a revenue sharing agreement with Musqueam. YVR is not going to give half their profits to Musqueam. They're going to up the prices and the cost for all of us in order to do that. Secondly, saying that there will be a co-governance arrangement with this whole swath of the Lower Mainland with Musqueam, but being unclear as to the terms and doing it in a series of agreements. We have a prime minister. Well, we have a prime minister who's responsible for this, but we have a premier in David Eby who said that he hadn't read the agreement. Something so important to British Columbians. Then, when he was confronted with pictures of himself at the signing table, he said, well, I was there, but I didn't ask any questions. I was just glad they were doing something for Indigenous people. Musqueam First Nation is a very wealthy First Nation. They have governance over not just their reserve lands, but also large areas around UBC, the endowment lands, Jericho, Vanier. They already have a lot of property, and they are a very wealthy band. Not all First Nations are wealthy. I know that. There's small remote communities in northern parts of Canada that are neglected. But that is not the case with Musqueam. Then the federal government, I believe, and the Musqueam have both said publicly, well, we're not after title to your land. Like, you're getting hysterical. Don't worry about it. And anyway, the courts will work it out. Here is the problem with that response. They are not going to take your deed, your piece of paper away, but they can make it worthless. When they say, let the courts work it out, when the Crown has abandoned the field for 95% of British Columbians, I don't have confidence that it's going to end up in a mutually beneficial situation for the 95% who are left out. There is no Ministry of Non-Indigenous Affairs. There's no one to go to say, what about us? Unless the government of the day, the Crown, represented by the government of the day, is prepared to fight for us. And this one is not.
Well, so because this issue is so important, maybe we could follow up with that. You know, there's an argument on the other side that says, well, this is all about reconciliation with First Nations. We've put off the reconciliation for too long. There's been no treaties, and we can either go through a court process, or we can sign treaties, or we can negotiate these deals. But all of this is happening with this backdrop of what happened when they made that announcement in 2021 at Kamloops about unmarked graves and a mass grave. And this has created this kind of, you could imagine, you know, as a lawyer, you know, that the judge will kind of size up the contestants as to their credibility. So in the one corner, you have victims of a genocide, and then you have the people who did the genocide. So, to your point about the lawyers and the governments and the way in which they're managing these cases, is justice really being done here in these court cases? And how can we get ourselves out of it? And more, and how could you, as if you're become Premier of BC, what strengths do you bring to it to help kind of right the wrongs here? It seems like it's one decision after another, all of these agreements that are being put together behind the scenes, a lack of transparency. People don't know what's going on. It's like a pot that's boiling, that people are just getting more and more angry, feeling manipulated, and feeling kind of abused by the system. So, how can we get ourselves out of this mess we've ended up in with all of the narrative of this genocidal country, supposedly, that, you know, deserves all the kind of, oh, you guys, you deserve this, just, you know, deal with it. It seems to be an unjust situation, and people are just getting more and more angry about it. How can this be resolved?
Well, people get angry over uncertainty. We need more certainty. We need more clarity. Nobody should be surprised that First Nations are now arguing with each other, or that non-Indigenous are angry with Indigenous, Indigenous are angry with non-Indigenous, because the way this is being handled has led to these divisions. And reconciliation can take many forms, but at the end of the day, we all should be wanting good jobs, peaceful living, and prosperity for all British Columbians. This should be something we all seek. I believe there is room for negotiation on economic development. I believe that we're already seeing it. There can be Indigenous, non-Indigenous partnerships. I actually think we need more public and private partnerships as well to deal with failing infrastructure throughout the province. Taylor Bridge, Quesnel Bridge, Massey Tunnel. You know, we're not dealing with our needs and growing populations well at all at the moment. This budget shut down 7 seniors care facilities, some of which had already started to be built, some with all their permits in place, and they're just done. I was just in Fort St. John. They've got a waiting list that's larger than the number of beds, and now they're told those beds won't be built. So, you know, we have lots of issues, but a lot of these issues affect all of us. And we shouldn't be always, in my mind, saying, well, you're above you or you're above you. What we need to get back to is principled negotiation. I took negotiation in Harvard Law, so I know a bit about that. It's in my background. I'm a certified mediator and arbitrator. I've been a human rights judge. You know, I believe that, again, my experience is something. You know, Margaret Thatcher once said, first you make the argument, then you win the election. You have to start being real with people about the real issues we face. And reconciliation, negotiations can end up in mutually beneficial agreements. But what we need to have a vision of is a certainty going into the future. Right now, the treaties we do have, and some are modern treaties, all have a caveat at the bottom saying if any First Nation gets a better deal than this one, you can reopen this all over again. So you can have a treaty that's dated that was very reasonable and beneficial 25 years ago, and someone's going to come along and say, well, this should be reopened. Under the terms of union between BC and Canada back in the day, 1870s, it was squarely in that terms of union that Aboriginal issues were the purview of the federal government. And again, here's where BC is a long way from Ottawa. And those Rocky Mountains sometimes seem very high. Someone who understands Ottawa, understands how Treasury Board works, understands how decisions are made, is at an advantage over someone who's, some of my competitors have never even been in politics before, never even put their name on a sign. And they say they want to be premier of this province. These are complex, multi-layered issues that need experience right now, need someone who knows how to navigate other levels of government and has dealt with indigenous issues in the past and knows how to do so in a respectful way, but a way that moves towards certainty. We are never going to get investment back in our province. We're not going to attract back our young professionals who have left the way we're going right now. We're making it so unaffordable and so restrictive to live here. And if right now I was making a decision as a young couple about whether to move to Alberta, where I might be able to afford a home and was not burdened by this uncertainty about title, and being here at home, the pull of home is always strong. But there's some realities of life that have to be addressed as well. The government taking over these are self-governing professions, taking over the health professions and health professionals on April 1st is driving doctors and nurses that we sorely need away. They're now going to do it with the Law Society. You know, this is not reasonable governance. It is not competent governance. So yes, there are competing claims. Yes, there are competing priorities. But that's what you vote people in to do, is to help you find a path that is one that achieves reconciliation without having the master-servant relationship all turned upside down. Governments are supposed to be the servants. The people are the masters, but they've turned it on its ear, and they are just telling us, this government, how we will live, what we will think, how we will proceed, whether our assets are worth anything or not, whether our professional competence will be reviewed by other professionals or just government appointees. Yeah, there's an old joke, you know, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. And they say, when you hear that, run in the other direction, because governments have never proven themselves to be good administrators. And we have to change it.
So if we could just shift gears for a second. So you actually served on the Human Rights Tribunal, and it's been much in the news lately due to the Barry Neufeld decision where they impose a $750,000 fine for things that he said about SOGI, 1, 2, 3 in schools, and the transgender issue. So there's that specific issue, but there seems to be uh, kind of an assault on free speech that's going on multiple levels, from the federal government, from the provincial government, from all these uh, various health colleges. So, as someone who's actually been with the Human Rights Tribunal, did you ever think that it could end up being so, in my opinion, ideologically captured to the point where they're looking to put people in jail or run people out of public life for having normal views that the rest of the society has? What is going on? What would you, some people are calling for the HRT to be scrapped or just thrown out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I very much want to make the distinction. I only was a judge on the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which
Oh,
is
okay,
completely
right.
separate from the BC Human Rights Tribunal. It is also run differently. There is a Canadian Human Rights Commission where you first go with your complaints. It's a two-tier process, and the cases that cannot be settled amicably then go before a tribunal for the hearing. And it's done at a very high level. It's done with written decisions, and those decisions are expected to be at the highest level of clarity and writing style. That's what I did for 5 years. I was appointed to that position by Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government. The BC Human Rights Tribunal operates differently. It is not a two-tier system. It is a tribunal of first response. So you put in a complaint and you're right there with the tribunal right away. There's no vetting or filtering or attempts to negotiate settlements in the way there is federally. What has happened with the Barry Neufeld case is outrageous in my view. To bring down a penalty of a life-ruining amount for what amounts to someone expressing, in his case, his Christian beliefs around the promotion of gender ideology in our school system and claiming along the way that there are two genders, to me is outrageous. Barry Neufeld actually just endorsed me online. He's been coming to my meet and greets because I am not saying the whole system should be scrapped. And you cannot, in my view, you should not get rid of our human rights legislation. There are legitimate human rights complaints. I dealt with some of them. People who were overlooked for promotion because of their color that could be demonstrated. People who were denied rental because of age or because of, again, their ethnicity or something. There is legitimate human rights complaints that should be heard. A woman who's been overlooked for promotion because of her gender. These are things where in our society, our legislative framework is that we believe in the dignity of the person in Canada, and we are among the top in the world in terms of the way we view human rights. However, with the BC Human Rights Tribunal, the head of that was appointed originally by the BC Liberals, I understand, was then renewed and perhaps even renewed again under the NDP government. To use the tribunal in a punitive way to promote an ideology and have that treated as so superior to freedom of speech, which has been guaranteed in our Constitution from the beginning of our country, is outrageous to me. It's an abuse of the system. It's an abuse of the act. It's an abuse of that tribunal's powers. I don't think that tribunal should have the ability, even if there is a legitimate human rights complaint that is found to be legitimate, they shouldn't have the power to levy that kind of of a fine or penalty against an individual. And not only did they say that he had to pay a life-ruining amount, but that money would then be distributed to each teacher in the Chilliwack Teachers Federation to the affront to their dignity. Really? Really? How is that? That is nonsense. That is not common sense or reasonableness. So you've decided ideologically that this man's freedom of speech should be curtailed to the point of a life-ruining penalty. And then you decide that that money will go to individual teachers who may or may not agree or disagree because their dignity, the dignity of the teacher, has been offended. That is ridiculous. So I don't know where it's going to go. It needs to be appealed. That man, Mr. Neufeld, should be supported by the public, those who agree that he has been egregiously treated, because not only is he sitting with a $750,000 penalty, he now has to pay for lawyers to help him fight this. And my understanding is he will fight it, but no one should be put in that position. So these kinds of powers have to be curtailed. But we get back to the government of the day. Who is promoting that same ideology? Who is appointing those particular people to that particular tribunal? Who is saying that the government should be in control of our health professionals and our legal professionals, but a tribunal can assess a penalty that is higher than most court decisions? That this is wrong. It's wrong. It has to be completely changed. It has to be repurposed in the sense that we have to get back to reasonableness. And I think British Columbians are on my side in this. I think they're on the side of Conservatives in this.
Okay, well, maybe just a final question, and that it seems there's a sense out there in the public is that these hot button social issues are really what are kind of driving people's concern. And there's some people say, well, there's the social issues and there's the economic issues and it's all. But don't the social issues affect the economic issues? If you're not allowed, if a social issue like gender ideology leads to the curtailment of free speech, well, doesn't that affect people's willingness to speak up on any political issue that challenges the powers that be? All of these, people are being smeared as racists, smeared as bigots. It comes right down. There was an issue right here in Westminster. To bring it down to the local level, there was the BC Housing decided to put a quote unquote tiny home village of containers, and there was no public consultation. It was just decided. They signed the lease, and boom, they're delivered. And all the residents pushed back, and all the residents who were pushing back were smeared as bigots by people who are not necessarily government, but they're kind of opposing. So you have this dynamic in BC right now where you have this kind of smearing of people as with all these labels, like all the conservatives. That there's this idea that, well, conservatives are defending the white supremacist colonial system. How can we get ourselves back to a more normal level of discourse in this province where there's not all this finger pointing?
Well, this is where leadership counts. I believe in a collaborative leadership style, but a decisive style. Sometimes there's hard truths and sometimes there's hard decisions to be made. But along the way, you should make every effort to work collaboratively with people, whether that's within a party system or in government. And I believe a reasonable, well-reasoned, clear approach gives people something to hold on to. Most people I know are absolutely tired and exhausted and fed up with the personalizing of these kinds of discussions. Robust discourse and discussion, I believe in. Personalizing, demonizing, following, the Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, that you personalize your opposition and make them into bad people. This is what they're doing. And they want you to feel badly about yourself when you know within yourself, if you have an open mind to all types of people and to a country that has always been welcoming of new people. It's just, it's a method, it's a tactic. And I believe this comes from the top, and it comes from leadership. If you are a leader of this province who shows respect for all people and is willing to sit down and listen to foresters, listen to miners, listen to the indigenous, find out what their prime motivations are, negotiate understandings that can work. You mentioned this early on, and that is also true. Sometimes things seem to work at the beginning, but then as they unfold, they can turn quite disastrous. But that is also a function of government, to have a long-term as well as a mid-term and short-term vision, to see with clarity where we should go as a country. And what we need to do is we have to have more transparent government, not less. We have this government making it harder to make FOI requests, freedom of information requests. They're making it so, ministers and ministerial staff can kind of push things along further and further without actually giving the public the information they're entitled to. They got rid of the merit commissioner. The very things that are meant to make government more accountable and more transparent, they're getting rid of. And they're taking, creeping, I call it government creep, into all manner of control of our lives. I don't think this is what the majority of British Columbians want, and they are getting discouraged by it. And I believe they want a fighter to lead. I believe they want someone who has a clear mind as to what needs to be done. Experience counts more than ever in this scenario, because you cannot take a year or two to figure out the job. We don't have that luxury. These things are upon us now, and we have to deal with them as soon as possible. I don't like these divisions. I'm a kind of a people person, I guess. I don't get it. But what I do know is it doesn't have to be this way. And if you lead by example, I believe that we will have a more prosperous country. If I can just say this for a moment, when I was Minister of National Revenue, I worked very closely with our then Minister of Finance, Jim Flaherty, later Joe Oliver, and Prime Minister Stephen Harper. We were coming out of the 08-09 recession. We had debt. The whole world was struggling with that recession. And we worked and we worked and we focused, and we ended up bringing down personal income tax, corporate income tax, GST from 7% to 5%. We brought in income splitting for seniors, and we got back to a balanced budget and a surplus. If I can be doing that for the country, I can be doing that for our province. Once alongside you getting your fiscal house in order as a government, you unleash our resources, get permitting done faster, bring back the engines of prosperity. Investment will come back, jobs come back, people have more money in their pocket. I want to get rid of the tax on gas. It's 44 cents a liter soon. I think we should do what Manitoba just did. They just took their PST off of food. Make everyday essentials more affordable, which is accomplished not by sitting mired in the debt the NDP has given us, but by getting out of that debt. Then your credit ratings improve. Everything starts to work again. That's what we need to concentrate on, not personal attacks that are really meaningless and don't get us anywhere.
Right. Okay. Kerry-Lynne Findlay, Thank you very much for talking to us today. So there's some key dates coming up in this. Not everyone can vote for the leader. You have to be a member. So what are some of the key dates and how can people find out more information about you and your campaign?
Well, thank you for asking that. My website is Findlay, Findlay, for the number bc.ca, Findlay for bc.ca. Of course, I'm online in Instagram and X and Facebook and YouTube, things like that. So there's certainly a lot of content out there now from various interviews I've done, also my statements on policy. But you're absolutely right. I've had people say, I support you all the way, I'll vote for you. And I said, but this isn't an election. This is a leadership bid. So you have to be a member of the party in order to vote for me. You can do that. You can donate as well or take out a membership through that website, findlayforbc.ca. And I am really asking people, I'm a volunteer team. We don't have millions of dollars to do this, and because we are doing it right. We're doing it in a principled approach. We are seeking people to, across the province, take out a membership or renew your membership. And if you can donate so that we can go all the way in this race, it's our intention to do so. We'll be showing up at the Juno debates tomorrow. Some people are not. I think that's a shame. I think if you really believe in what you're doing and you believe in improving life for British Columbians, you should be prepared to debate those points. I'll be there and people will see me. They'll see others in the race as well. They can make up their own minds. But please do consider joining and supporting the Findlay team. Thank you.
Okay, and speaking of New Westminster, since we're sitting in New Westminster, we will be at the debate as well. It's just down the hill over here at Anvil Center.
Oh,
And
it's in the West. Yeah.
yeah, it's being held right in New Westminster, and we've been there many times to Anvil Center. It's a wonderful venue, I must say. Uh, Bit of a plug for the Anvil Center, but people
And
will
I'll
see it.
just on you West again for a moment.
Yeah.
You know, that recent protest over the supportive housing,
Mm,
people are really concerned about hardened addicts being housed with vulnerable seniors and low income people. They want them to have support in more maybe adjacent to a hospital setting or where they can get the support they need. I'm talking about people suffering from addictions who we'd love to see returned to purposeful lives and drug free. But having them housed in the same complexes and the same areas as vulnerable seniors and low income is not the way to go. And I support the community efforts there. So Surrey, other places in Surrey, Richmond, Burnaby, people are coming together. This is not what people want to do. People don't want to go and make signs in their garage and go and protest, but they feel they must to let municipal governments know and the provincial government know that this is a wrong-headed policy. These are the sorts of things that we would change as Conservatives.
right. And just another point, it's partly the reality of the policy and how this will play out and the concerns for safety. And there's also a railroad that goes right by this little tiny home village. There's also the lack of consultation. This was just simply announced as happening. Contract is signed, it's going ahead, uh, and we'll give you information, but they're not interested in listening. So people are just so fed up of being told what they're supposed to think and then being smeared as bigots and anti-poor and uh, all these names. So they're sick and tired of it. So look forward to seeing you in New Westminster tomorrow. And I
Great.
thank you very much for joining us today. I'm David Brett. I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times. And I hope you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X and subscribe to our newsletter through our website, newwesttimes.com, where you can also support us because independent media is does cost money. We have it's not free to do what we do. So thanks again for joining us today. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Dave. It's good to see you again. Thank you.
Okay. All right.